Hello, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Faithless Forrest.
And I'm Naturalist Nathan. Yeah.
And we want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them and for people interested in a non-supernatural worldview.
Right. On today's show, we're going to talk about...
we may be improvising, but with luck, we're going to talk a little bit about retiring Justice of the Supreme Court, Kennedy.
Yeah. Should we...
But before we go, we're going to tell about sponsors.
Also talk about sponsors?
Yes. So
on the Atheist Society of Knoxville and Rational of East Tennessee.
Yep.
So here you go.
The Atheist Society of Knoxville frequently has a fun meetup at a bar or eatery. The next meetup is Tuesday at about 5:30 at the Black Horse Pub and Brewery, 4429 Kingston Pike in the Western Plaza Shopping Center. For details, go to knoxvilleatheist.org and where you can find the meetup. When you get to the meetup, look for the silver-jacketed copy of Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion standing upright on the table. And as Matt Dillahunty at Atheist Experience says, everyone is welcome to our happy hour for food, drink, and conversation. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't.
Right. The Rationalists of East Tennessee have several regular monthly meetings. See our website, rationalists.org, for details. The first and third Sunday mornings of the month are usually lectures of lively roundtable discussions. The second Sunday, we hold Skeptics Book Club. On the fourth Sunday, they mix it up, sometimes with a potluck get-together or in a member's home or other variety of things. And then later in the show, we can give you websites to visit for additional details, including times and locations.
Alrighty, so we're hoping to get a phone call from a lawyer, but until that happens, Nathan and I will do our best to discuss things, and hopefully we won't have to resort to song and dance to entertain the viewers. Know any good songs?
I do not.
All right. So I guess what prompted me to think about this show was the announcement of the impending retirement of Justice Kennedy. And although he's been on the court a long time, and he's been the swing vote guy, so sometimes he votes with the more liberal justices, and sometimes he votes with the more conservative justices. I sent out a request to several members of the Rationalists of East Tennessee who are lawyers. None of them could be here today, but I got a reply back from one of the lawyers who lives well out of town with some opinions. And I guess what I'd like to do is read this to Nathan and the viewers, some of the feedback we got. My broad opinion about Kennedy is that he was a mostly right-of-center justice for most of his career. For cases that did not involve individual civil liberties, it's unlikely that his replacement will vote all that differently than he. So let's take that again. He says for cases that don't involve civil liberties, a conservative replacement would not vote all that differently. In other words, I think what this member was saying is that Kennedy voted with the more liberal justices when it was in cases of civil liberty.
Or maybe individual civil liberty is pretty well defined. This is what I would expect most judges would all kind of go with.
Okay, there's some things further down that he wrote that maybe address that. So let's move to the next paragraph. On matters of criminal justice, criminal procedure in particular, he was very much a law and order, right of center voter. He was generally in favor of the death penalty and giving states fairly broad leeway to decide if, when, and how it should be implemented. He didn't always vote in favor of the police on exclusionary rule changes, but mostly did. So do you know what exclusionary rule would be? It's when evidence is found during maybe a search, and the defendants may say, you found that evidence inappropriately. That evidence should be excluded. So, for instance, if a suspect confesses before he's read his Miranda rights, such a confession is not allowed in court. It is excluded. So what he's saying is that he didn't always favor the police on the exclusionary rule changes, but mostly did. So once again, that ties in with his assertion that he was a protector of civil liberties, or maybe liberties for individuals. Alrighty. On matters of structural government power, he was a formalist, a textualist if it came to constitutional issues, though such things rarely do. In the largely invisible, boring, and pedestrian work of the court, and then in parentheses he's written APA cases, bankruptcy, intellectual property, close paren, he was careful to limit his inferences about legislative intent. He was careful to limit his inferences about legislative intent. So, let's review that again. What might that mean? In matters of structural government power, he was a formalist. So formalist, I assume, means looking at the structure of our government as how it's defined by the branches in the Constitution. And a textualist if it came to constitutional issues. In other words, he might look very carefully at the punctuation and say, well, is this an and or an or? Those kinds of things. Very parsing the words and sentence structure, kind of.
Sounds like he would be, kind of not take a lot of leeway, I guess.
Well, the Constitution begins with some very expansive kind of things. We, the people of the United States of America, to ensure. Oh goodness, I'm now having trouble. I hate to not do it verbatim. It's, something to the effect of, to ensure the benefits of freedom and prosperity, do hereby ordain and establish this Constitution. So that, and then there's a list. It includes things like, provide for the common defense and promote the general welfare. And elsewhere in the Constitution, it says something to the effect that all necessary and proper powers. Those lend themselves to interpretation. The necessary and proper powers were not enumerated, but yet, in the Constitution, it'll talk about the government maybe. Well, there's an interesting thing in the Constitution I love to bring up to people who want to perhaps argue that secession was a possible thing, and that is that our Constitution gives the federal government, the national government, a rather unique right, a duty, and that is the duty to ensure a representative form of government in the states. In other words, states cannot abolish their legislature and appoint a hereditary king, for instance. States do not have that power. And the federal government has the responsibility to ensure representative government. What that means is that right in our Constitution is a proscription for how the national government could make war on a state for misbehaving. Because when a state misbehaves and you use force on it, that can only be interpreted as war, or you could say a police action. And so someone who says, oh, well, states, came into the Union, they can leave the Union, the answer is no, they can't, because the citizens of those states are guaranteed a representative government, form of government, by the national government.
There is some meat there as far as national government goes, not just
And so
nothingness.
So there are times when I read, especially it crops up in the amendments to the Constitution, where it'll say something to the effect that no one can be held in involuntary servitude except for crimes that are properly adjudicated. I'm paraphrasing there. And then there's like a paragraph that follows that explicitly gives the federal government power to legislate this. I've always thought that every time it says that, it's utterly unnecessary. And I assume, and if we'd had a lawyer call in, I would actually ask this question. I would assume that there may have been a Supreme Court case where the Supreme Court said, yeah, that's not constitutional, or sorry, the federal government, it's almost like they would have to contradict themselves. The federal government has the power to do that, but they weren't granted the power to enforce it. Meaning, there's a meaningless dance going on of words to get around probably a past Supreme Court decision where they said, yeah, the Constitution never gave you the power to enforce that. Alrighty, so I guess we were talking about this because he talked about a textualist if it came to constitutional issues. Oh, we have a call. Hello, caller. This is Freethought Forum. Can you give us a name or a nickname?
It's Charles from Central Illinois.
Well, hello, Charles. Thank you for calling. We don't have a screener here, so you popped on live with the audience. We're discussing, hopefully intelligently, the judicial legacy of Justice Kennedy. Do you have something to comment or question on that, or do you want to go to another topic?
Well, the complex issues dealt with by the Supreme Courts have often had severe repercussions. And one of the ones that I found interesting was that not about 180 years ago, Andrew Jackson basically told the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to kiss off because he refused to abide by the court's decision.
I don't remember the specifics of that case, but I've certainly heard how Andrew Jackson essentially disregarded or ignored a Supreme Court decision.
It was on the
was it Indian removal?
Brought forth by the Indian nations demanding that Andrew Jackson's keep the treaty agreements that had been given to them. The courts ruled in their favor, and Andrew Jackson says if the courts made the ruling, then the courts can enforce it and went about his business.
Yeah, I would have said that's an impeachable offense there, and if the Congress had been doing its job, they'd have said, oh no, you've got to follow the rules here or you don't get to play in this game.
Yeah, and so...
But that is the kind of notable exception. When people talk about what happens if the executive branch fails to obey, that is the example they bring up, and I know of none other.
Well, the thing of it is that until originally in the Articles of Confederation, there was a judiciary provided for, but both parties had to agree to have that case brought together. If one had descended into saying, no, I'm not going to attend that court, there was no legal standing for the other party to federal or above state level
to force
court
adjudication.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Charles, let's assume that at least one of the viewers here doesn't know what the Articles of Confederation are. Could you summarize for me and Nathan and the viewers?
That was the original agreement drafted and accepted in 1776 when we declared independence from the British government.
Uh-huh.
And it laid out what was and wasn't the United States legally bound to do.
Uh-huh.
And which one of the United States was allowed to do what. For instance, taxation. There was no binding authority for the central government to impose taxation, and all they could do is send requests to the various states.
So what we had there is that the national government had no reliable source of income, and that actually then causes something to appear in the current Constitution. Let me, though, re-summarize that, and that is that, and I'm going to make another point. A lot of people think that the Declaration of Independence created the United States. That's not the case. The Declaration of Independence is like a divorce, a statement of divorce from the British Crown, King George, and the actual text in the Declaration of Independence refers to these states as separate and independent, really nations, with the power to conduct war and make peace treaties. The Declaration of Independence did not create the United States. It created 13 separate little nations. And they very quickly formed a union and called themselves the United States. And that union, the terms of that union are the Articles of Confederation, which by 1787 had become unworkable. And in particular, that thing about no ability to collect taxes was a stumbling block or a problem. The national government had debt left over from the War of Independence that wasn't getting paid. They'd issued bonds, and the bonds had become nearly worthless. Few people would pay for them because they almost had no hope that they'd ever get paid on. And within our current Constitution, which forms our current national government, the government that has been in place basically since 1788, is a clause that says that the new government will assume all of the debts of the old government. What they were doing was making sure that you didn't set a precedence where the government would just sort of
default on what it's owed due to other people.
Yeah, by saying, oh, well, we're going to write a new constitution, it's a new government now, go and find the old government under a rock somewhere and try and get money from them. So, they created, Charles, go ahead, I spoke a lot, you go.
It also imposed the fact that Congress shall have the sole authority to mint coin. So beforehand, you could have articles and bills of authority for certain amounts of money from each of the different states, but they didn't have to acknowledge them, or they could change how much they were worth. What would be a bill of right for $25 in one state could be declared to be worth only $20 in another.
Yeah, so they were issuing separate currencies. They didn't always have an exchange mechanism or honor them. It was an impediment to actually acting as a nation, a single nation. And that is one of the kinds of things that led to the call for the creation of, well, at first the delegates were sent to the convention to try and patch up the Articles of Confederation, and they rather quickly just said, let's start with a blank sheet of paper, and they designed the current government.
Yes, one of the problems they had is that you could be given a taxation for something manufactured out of your state that was higher than what the taxes were for anything made in your state, which caused very, very severe problems in trade between the colonies, the former colonies.
Yeah, so it caused problems in trade and then causes resentment against what should be our fellow citizens.
Right.
Well,
they were
fellow
very much
states
afraid
and governments.
that this was going to break us apart to the point of where we'd have a civil war. And then the British would come marching down from what is now Canada and be welcome.
Yeah.
And
So-
rescue us from ourselves, right? That would be.
Yeah, so bottom line is that we were trying to talk about Kennedy, and one of our members had talked about him being a textualist if it came to constitutional issues. And that's, I guess, where we then start talking about the nuances of what's written in the Constitution. And some of it is not apparent, or its meaning is not apparent, unless you know the broader history in which it's written. And that's why I brought up that point about the debt of the former government was assumed by the new government. And that's an important thing to assure stability, as well as it would be a very bad precedent to ever let the national government escape its financial obligations by, just writing a new constitution and sort of saying, well, that was then, this is now. All right. Well,
Okay, I'll see if somebody else will call in.
well, thank you for calling, Charles. Were you listening online? How does the audio sound?
I wasn't listening online. I'm out walking my dog.
All righty. Well, I hope you're having fine weather up there in central Illinois and the corn is growing rapidly.
Oh, it's way above my head now.
All righty. Well, thank you,
Catch
Charles.
you later.
We'll say goodbye.
Bye.
All right. Well, the line is open. We encourage callers to help us talk about the legacy of Justice Kennedy, especially if there's a caller or a viewer who might know what an APA case is. I don't know what that acronym is. Any idea you do, Nathan? All right.
Can Google it really fast.
Yeah, let's not do that. We don't want to watch viewers do some Googling. We have a few more paragraphs here to read. So this is once again from a member of the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Of all his colleagues, this is Kennedy he's speaking, he was the least afraid to look abroad to see how other nations had addressed legal issues where he found real ambiguity and a need to craft a rule. Some conservative legal scholars criticized him for this, but I never saw anything wrong with learning from the examples of other nations, so long as the ultimate decision is made to fit into our own culture and legal system. So that's a very interesting observation about Kennedy. And it struck a real nerve with me, or a familiar note. And that is because the framers of our Constitution were aware of how other nations formed their governments, both then current as well as in the past. And I have read some interesting reasonings about how government should work or be formulated when I read the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers were persuasive articles published in newspapers in New York during the drive to ratify the Constitution. And they were written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, I think John Jay, and maybe a third man whose name I cannot remember. But they cited specific examples of how governments in Europe had both prospered as well as ultimately undone themselves based on their structure. So this government we have was not something just dreamed up because they somehow had divine guidance. They had the guidance of the observation of the real world. In other words, our government is the government of natural scientists or natural political philosophers.
Yeah, I like that too. I mean, that's, it's kind of scientific, right? You study the
It's exactly
history
that.
and you, right.
And learn from the mistakes.
Do your homework, and it's not just a magical creation that came out of nowhere.
Yeah. there were articles, in those articles there were references to how the Greek democracies worked, how the Roman Republic worked, and then there was something I think called, they were like mercantile empires out of Holland or the Netherlands. I'm trying to say Habsburgs. Viewers, if you are more current on this than I am, give us a call. The number's down there in front of Nathan.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought that was a nice observation. It was something I would never have even thought to ask about a justice, that he was willing to look at the examples of other national governments for how they work. Sometimes you hear people talking about how our states form little experiments in democracy, little sub-democracies, and the word experiment is used. And it is foolish to ignore the experiments going on in the other nations of the world. And I've never heard anyone who talks about how the states are little experiments in democracies saying, oh, and we should look to other nations for inspiration or it's almost as if so many people talk about our Constitution as if it is the most perfect thing that there is. For its time, it was very advanced, but a thing that it did incorporate was human slavery. And if someone wants to claim that it was our Constitution is some divine gift from God, I've heard people say this thing out loud. Apparently, slavery was that gift as well.
And it's in the Bible.
It is in the Bible. In fact, in our Constitution, it is the most biblical thing. It is. But
and really, if you get down to it, if you get to heaven, would you be free there or would you be a slave? Because I'm not sure you really have free will.
So yes, that turns into the kind of question of, is there free will in heaven, or which is equivalent to saying, can you sin in heaven?
Yeah, I don't know.
And if you can't sin in heaven, does that mean you don't have free will? Now, of course, you'll hear people say, oh, well, you'll be changed so you don't want to, in which case, well, that means you've been brainwashed, right?
Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's slavery all the way up, right?
Slavery all the way up.
There's just one master.
All righty. Well, we're about halfway through. We've got about half of these bullets talked about. You've got some things here too. I don't think we're going to run out. Let's press on.
Keep on.
The reason he drew so much political attention, of course, was that his relative moderation on issues of individual civil liberties. In particular, he pushed to author a series of cases addressing LGBTQ equality issues, insisting that these Americans had to be treated with, here he's got this in quotation marks, equal dignity, end quote. In the face of public scorn and disgust, he will be remembered most for the, I'm going to mangle this, Obergefell. Am I anywhere close on the pronunciation on that?
Obergefell. Yeah.
All right, viewers, if we're pronouncing this wrong, call in and correct us.
Versus Hodges?
And versus Hodges.
Mm-hmm.
And Windsor before it. But Lawrence and Romer were also important links in that chain that tend to be overlooked now. Mm-hmm. So you've printed out the
Obergefell.
Yeah, there we go. Versus Hodges decision. Do you want to maybe do you have some highlights on that or things you might want to talk about?
Well, it actually is kind of a combination of cases.
All right, and so you've we need to give credit where credit is due. This is coming from Wikipedia.org.
Oh, right. So I think the main point was that there was a law about or restricting who could marry who. Right?
Uh-huh. Well, So, I mean, there's been examples of that a long time. People often will talk about the Loving versus Virginia that was adjudicated in, I think, 67 or 68, that prevented interracial marriage. So, but I think are you talking about more recent things?
This is recent. Yeah, this case was decided in 2015, right?
Well, Obergefell.
The previous cases.
Yes, that's what I thought we were asking about or talking about.
Right. Let's see. Involved Obergefell and Kasich. Let's see what else. Henry versus Wimslow. There's one in Kentucky for Bork versus Bashir. Love versus Bashir. And Tennessee had Tanko versus Haslam. And
so I'll confess, I didn't know there was a Tennessee case involved like this. Have you had a chance to read this, or are we're flying by the seat of our pants here?
Really, like, I've seen it for the first time. So,
all right.
But all of these cases had been kind of controversial and revolve around human rights and who's allowed to marry who.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think that there had been kind of contradictory decisions handled down by the different states and or the different federal court districts. And that kind of forced it into the Supreme Court level, because when the federal district courts produce mutually incompatible results, it pretty much means the Supreme Court has to take the case.
That's why you have to go to Supreme Court, because they couldn't all decide, right?
Yeah.
Which makes sense. Now, didn't you say you read the decision in this case?
I'm a little reluctant to jump all the way to it, but we certainly do not want to end the show without reading the decision that Kennedy wrote. And I'm hoping the summary is here, because my piece of paper doesn't have it on it.
Not sure. Oral arguments.
And
Majority opinion.
Majority opinion, and the majority opinion ends. Yeah, this is it. So this is beautiful, and I know I've read this on air before. Why don't you slowly and clearly read Justice Kennedy's beautiful humanistic words?
But so the end result, though, really is that same-sex marriage was.
The law of the land is a phrase used, and by that they mean that all states are required to recognize the marriage of all other states like this. Right. Previously, there were states who were threatening to not only block it within their own state, but to not recognize marriages that occurred in other states. And that has impact if people move to different states, to retire or for a new job.
Right. So, this, in closing, it says, Justice Kennedy wrote for the court, "No union is more profound than marriage, for it embodies the highest ideals of love, fidelity, devotion, sacrifice, and family. In forming a marital union, two people become something greater than once they were. As some of the petitioners in these cases demonstrate, marriage embodies a love that may endure even past death. It would misunderstand these men and women to say they disrespect the idea of marriage. Their plea is that they do respect it so deeply that they seek to find its fulfillment for themselves. Their hope is not to be condemned to live in loneliness, excluded from one of civilization's oldest institutions. They ask for equal dignity in the eyes of the law. The Constitution grants them that right."
That is just beautiful. And notice how he talked, the phrase equality was there. That was something that I remember had mentioned earlier, and he put it in quotes. Equal dignity. Was equal dignity the exact phrase?
Yes, equal dignity in the eyes of the law.
Yeah. And so I asserted that this is a humanist thing. So I wonder if we got a slide for the definition of humanism. I don't remember if I've made one of them or not, Sam. But so, Nathan, how would you extemporaneously define humanism?
Humanism? Depends on who you ask, but I would define it as all humans should be treated as humans, right? As equals, pretty much.
In other words, as
Or-
you would want to be treated yourself.
With equal, yeah. I mean,
It's another way, I think, to say the golden rule, which is found in the Bible as put through the lips of Jesus, but is also found in history as put through the lips of Confucius.
repeatedly, over and over. And there are variations. Don't do things that other people, that you might like, to other people. Don't do things you wouldn't like. Do things that are the best for the other person. Yeah.
In fact, even the Gospel of the Flying Spaghetti Monster echoes these things. So even the most modern carbohydrate-based fastest growing religion have these concepts built into them. I was about to say, I've read the 7 tenets of the Satanic Church, and I'm at a loss to remember if they have something like that. The tenets of the Satanic Church, they have an interesting thing. They try to head off this idea that something like the Constitution can be dogma by saying that the effect and the intent is more important than the legalese. That's a very interesting and I think kind of innovative contribution they have made to the philosophy of, maybe let's call it, government.
I've heard of the spirit of the law, though. That seems to go way back.
Well, and that's where people are saying, well, these words may have a narrower meaning when written than could reasonably inferred. And that's the kind of thing that turns into this argument about textualism versus intent of the lawyers or the authors at the time. What did they intend? How should we say? The text is written and it's in front of you, and as long as you both read the same language, you can agree that there's 5 words and they're common English words. But when strung together, a little bit of ambiguity. Each word has potentially multiple meanings, and then when strung together as a union, there may be further increased ambiguity. But I see we're getting close to the 20-minute mark, and maybe what we ought to do is the mid-program break. So if Sam can give us some of the mid-program break slides, let's try and do this.
Sure. In case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum.
Questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else?
Are we muted?
You're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. Do you find stories of talking snakes laughable? Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org.
And
we're back. Hi. In case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by them and by individual contributions. We have moved. This is our new regular time, every Wednesday from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern in Knoxville Community Access Television Channel 612, 99, or 193, depending on your local cable network. Tell your out-of-town friends to see us streaming online at ctvknox.org.
All right, today's show is live. It is, I believe, the 12th of July. 11th of July, 2008. You can call the number on your screen, and we've already seen the short video. So if we flip this page over, we want to mention that the show's sponsor is, among others, the Atheist Society of Knoxville, or ASK. There's approximately one meetup a week, once in a while a few others, where we have food, drink, and conversation. You can find community camaraderie with atheists, agnostics, freethinkers, and other like-minded persons if you come to one of our events. The next meetup is on next Tuesday at starting around 5:30 at the Black Horse Pub and Brewery, 4429 Kingston Pike in the Western Plaza Shopping Center.
Right. You can find, information on the Rationalist of East Tennessee website on upcoming events.
We just had the Adopt a Highway pickup last week,
right.
And the book club was last week. I don't know what the book is for August, but I do know what the book is for September, because I believe that is the book that I will be leading the review on. So September, we're going to do Flatland. Have you ever read Flatland, Nathan?
Yeah, I have heard of that one. I think
you've heard of it. The subtitle is beautiful. It is a romance in multiple dimensions, or something like that. It is a fun mix of introduction to higher geometrical geometry, as well as a kind of a bizarre critique of what I assume is Victorian English class structure. It's a peculiar juxtaposition of those two things. More is Flatland is out of copyright. You can find it free online at gutenberg.org. So you can download it to your favorite electronic reading device, or you can be a stick in the mud like me and get papyrus copy of it.
Now, is that right? 7:15?
I guess it would be the 15th.
Yeah, and coming up it's this Sunday?
Okay, yeah, that would be this Sunday's program, the 15th of July. The subject is online security and privacy.
Yeah, and it'll be out at Pellissippi, the main campus.
Yep, we are in the Goins Cafeteria Annex. The Goins building is the principal administration building.
At 10:30 in the morning.
The program begins at 10:30. Usually there's some snacks. Usually there's some coffee. Hopefully we'll have these things ready.
Sometimes it's a little hard to find because it's kind of in the...
You have to kind of drive past the building and enter around the rear. Usually we have a few signs that will say Rationalists of East Tennessee out. If everything goes as normal, look for the signs. But once again, if you forget all of this, go to the website. There's a bit of a description for how to find the room.
All right. So what else?
I think we kind of covered it. We can go back to, we've got just a little more than 15 minutes. Hopefully we could get a few callers out there to call in and maybe talk about maybe your favorite Supreme Court decision that Justice Kennedy swayed your way, or maybe gripe about a decision that he went the other way.
Sure. And the number is 865-215-2288. And this is a live show.
This is a live show today, Wednesday, the 11th of July. All right, so let's go back to this letter from the RET member. He has written, on Establishment Clause issues, he had his own path and never really got a lot of traction with his colleagues beyond the Lee versus Weissman case involving compelled religious speech. He had a fairly broad vision of what it meant to compel someone to participate in a religious activity, but he couldn't ever really square the circle of his vision with compelled religious observances with permitted religious invocations. On the free exercise side of things, he was actually a pretty standard conservative, giving a broad reading to both the old Sherbert and the new RFRA tests. So RFRA would be the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The Sherbert is apparently a decision he's referring, which I've not found time to take up. But one of the decisions I know that happened somewhere within the past 10 years was the Greek versus Galloway decision. And that decision was handed down in a way that a lot of us in the Freethought community like. The city or township of Greece, New York, was having regular prayers before the city meeting. And a woman by the name of Galloway challenged this as, a church-state entanglement. Oh, we have got another call. Want to push the button and greet the caller?
Hello, caller. Can we have your name or nickname?
Caller, you're on the air. There's no screener. Give us a name or a nickname.
A caller would be just fine.
All right.
Hi, caller.
Your regular voice comes through, and we're discussing Justice Kennedy's decisions, or if you want to drag us a little off topic, we're willing to do that too. We have about 13 minutes left.
No, it's pretty much on topic. You seem to be singing the praises of Justice Kennedy, which I think is unfounded.
Well, we were about to get to Greece versus Galloway, where I was going to lay some criticism, but
Well, even a blind pig gets an acorn every now and then.
So I've heard.
But
So I did invite callers to call in and gripe. Please gripe away.
Well, I'm not griping so much as stating the facts. The facts are that the Supreme Court decisions come down right along party lines for 95% of the decisions since the year 2000. So, the idea that a justice is there interpreting the Constitution, as pointed out by Rachel Maddow for one, is a little bit ridiculous in that more or less the person is just finding an excuse, no matter how weak it is, to support whatever party it was that put them in office. So I don't think we can expect that much from Justice Kennedy, although he had been a swing vote in some of the cases. But I think rather than the history of singing his praises, maybe you should be looking at Brett Kavanaugh, who is going to be our new Supreme Court justice, who's probably going to be confirmed.
Yeah. And the answer is that a week ago when we were deciding the subject of this program, that name had not been announced, but certainly Kennedy's had. And so, I knew a little. I solicited input from lawyers in our within the Rationalists of East Tennessee, and I got a little feedback. That's why it's the subject it is.
Oh, I see. Well, regarding Kavanaugh, I'd like to put out kudos to President Trump for picking him. I mean, the guy is really a right-wing radical, and not going to expect any decisions from him that would be anything that would be expected to be beneficial to President Trump. But we can give Mr. Trump credit for not picking someone for the Supreme Court who is a Russian.
All right. We'll note that.
I'm being serious here.
There's nothing in the Constitution that says that the Supreme Court justices even have to be citizens. There's
Exactly.
only citizenship tests for things like the president and the legislatures. And viewers out there, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that caller is correct. Trump could have done that.
Yes, I am correct. As a matter of fact, I'm surprised he didn't nominate Judge Reinhold or someone.
Or some TV celebrity.
It has the name Judge in it. He might have thought, that's good enough.
Right, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. But, when I say, I'm being very serious when I'm saying I'm surprised he didn't nominate a Russian, because just recently he nominated for Brian Brzezinski, to lead the Justice Department's criminal division, who would ultimately deciding the Mueller case if Rosenstein was to get fired by Trump. And
this name doesn't mean anything to me, and I'm assuming there's at least one viewer out there who doesn't. Please do.
His last job was working for the Alpha Bank, which is a Russian bank. So when I say that it's good that he didn't nominate somebody with Russian connections, I mean it.
Yeah.
So, you know, we got to give the devil his due. Oh, also, is it Naturalist Nathan?
Naturalist Nathan, that's what I'm going with.
Yeah.
That's correct.
You're supposed to wave when they say that.
Oh, yeah. Hi.
Do what?
How's it going?
Yeah, you might want to choose another moniker. For a lot of people, naturalist means nudist.
Oh, no, that's naturist.
Naturist?
I need to pronounce it carefully. You're right, probably.
Oh, okay.
Pronounce it carefully.
Anyway, just wanted to give a little shout out there for that Supreme Court pick. The Senate just today affirmed Brian Brzezinski to lead the Justice Criminal Division, and who has definite ties to Russia. So
a Russian agent. I wonder if he actually registered as a Russian agent, because
actually he should have, because he was working for Alpha Bank, and Alpha Bank's interests were not America's interests; they were a foreign government's interest.
Yeah.
And therefore, if he was operating with them inside the United States, he would need to register as a spy.
A foreign agent.
From what I understand, there's a lot of money in Russian oil reserves somewhere.
Russian oil reserves?
I don't know. I suspect that if Russia had no money, then things would be different.
Well, they don't have that much money, but they do have a lot of power. During July 4th, there were over the July 4th weekend, 6 of our U.S. senators were in Russia, conferring with the Russian government. So I'm kind of wondering how many people we have in America who are beholden to the Russians.
All righty.
Anyway, you were talking about, I assume off the subject of God is a terrible lie.
Well, that's just a given, really.
That was Sam's contribution. Sam's operating the camera system today, and since he's not on camera, he got that in.
Oh, I see. Well, I just thought that was not going along with the subject, but I thought I'd call in and give our president a little kudos there.
All right. So congratulations to President Trump for not nominating a Russian to the Supreme Court.
All right.
We can be thankful for small things or something like that.
Yeah, and thank you for calling, caller.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All righty. Goodbye. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left that we could talk to someone. If you've been calling, if you've been watching and you agree or disagree with us, you can give us a call. We still got a little bit of time left.
That's right. It's 865-215-2288.
So I was talking about Greece versus Galloway. Greece versus Galloway was a decision that went against the more liberal interests, and it was decided by the Supreme Court that what they were doing did not violate the Jefferson's wall of separation between church and state. And there was this kind of flimsy sort of reasoning that, well, they weren't trying to exclude people of other faiths or anything, even though I think there'd been a 10-year record of nothing but Christians offering prayers. The result of that decision, though, was to galvanize the Freethought community and some other religious minorities, so that they stepped up and said, all right, you're going to have to let us give invocations. And we here in East Tennessee, the Rationalists of East Tennessee, have officiants, maybe the term, a couple members designated to give invocations on the behalf of our organization, much like churches have ministers. And we experienced discriminatory behavior when our officiant spoke at Oak Ridge. Her microphone was not turned on promptly, so she was, not half of what she said wasn't heard. And then it was cut off prematurely. And several members of the government showed her disrespect by walking out on her. So what we have here is we have a government-endorsed practice where members of the government were then allowed to choose to show favoritism or disfavoritism in this forum. So they, it was a very bad thing, and this kind of thing has happened elsewhere in the nation. There are instances where an atheist or a member of another religious minority applied to do an invocation, and the government body involved decided, let's just stop doing this. And which is actually kind of the outcome that we in the non-belief community, that many of us in the non-belief community might like. It's that, governments are there to decide issues related to law and property rights and enforcement. They've got no business
performing rituals,
doing religious rituals. Yes, I was going to say supernatural rituals, perhaps.
Oh well, yeah. I guess habits are kind of like rituals too, and business is business. But supernatural rituals. I mean, voodoo. I mean,
that's kind of what it is. It's or I think Larry Rhodes liked to say it. It's witchcraft and sorcery, because that's what's happening when someone prays. They're asking a supernatural power to intervene to change things on their behalf. Is that not witchcraft?
Yeah.
Is that, and if it were to come true, would that not be sorcery?
And does the state respect this, or where? I wonder what our Supreme Court is going to start saying if people say, well, everyone has to believe what we believe. I mean, that's not American.
Yeah.
If they change the court enough.
It's a kind of a tenuous thing that the Supreme Court, a member sufficiently motivated can find a way to, an excuse to make a ruling the way he wants to. That's something said about the Bible. The Bible, you can pick and choose and build a good moral story out of the Bible, but you can pick and choose and develop an appalling moral philosophy out of the Hebrew and Christian Bibles.
Yeah, depending on who's picking, and if they're literal about, the words. I don't know. Yeah. I guess the same thing can happen with laws.
We've got a few moments left. I guess I'd like to plow through this real quick, then we're going to have to do our close-up.
Sure.
Our member writes, reproductive right is probably where his departure will have the greatest impact. Let's be clear, Roe versus Wade is now symbolic in name for the issue of abortion rights, and the real controlling case is Planned Parenthood versus Casey. Kennedy and his colleague Sandra Day O'Connor were the authors of the unreasonable burden standard that now controls evaluating state-level regulations of abortions. And I guess I don't have time for the last paragraph. We're going to need to start wrapping things up.
So if you get out your pen and paper, it's been Freethought Forum, a program by Atheist Society Knoxville and Rationalist of East Tennessee.
You can give us feedback by email at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com or on our Facebook page, Freethought Forum Knoxville. That's where I've been getting feedback lately.
Yeah. Or you and your friends can see the show on Wednesday evenings from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on this Knoxville station and online at ctvknox.org.
We'd like to thank Charles and Caller for speaking to us today, and the staff at CTV Knox, Sam for running the camera and monitoring the phone, and all of our viewers.
Yep, and nuns, those who identify with no religion, are the fastest growing religious group in America. Right here in East Tennessee, the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee are places you can find fellowship and fun.
Remember, you are not alone.